There are summers that drift by without leaving a mark, hazy stretches of days too similar to tell apart. Then there are summers that change you forever, weeks or even hours where everything tilts, when you realize the person you were at the start of the season will never be the same by the end. For me, it happened upstairs, in a room that wasn't even mine, on afternoons so golden they still glow in my memory like light trapped in glass. I was 17 that summer, restless in a way I couldn't name, caught between who I thought I was and who I secretly hoped I might become. It started with my aunt's house, an old place with creaky floorboards and long, slanting corridors that smelled faintly of cedar. She had asked me to stay for a couple of weeks while she traveled, mostly to keep an eye on the place. I didn't expect much beyond silence and the hum of cicadas outside, maybe long hours with books I would pretend to read. But the upstairs was different. The upstairs had a presence, a secret pulse. My aunt's daughter, my cousin Lily, had moved away for college months before, leaving behind a bedroom that felt suspended in time. It was the only one on the top floor, a corner room with 2 wide windows that caught every trace of afternoon sun. The first time I walked in, it was like stepping into someone else's dream. Posters curling at the edges, a vanity mirror cluttered with bottles of nail polish, clothes draped over the back of a chair as if she might walk in any minute and slip them on. I shouldn't have lingered. But I did. I let my fingers trail over a sequined top, cool and slippery against my skin. I caught my reflection in her tall mirror and saw myself looking both out of place and not out of place at all. The thought startled me so much I actually took a step back, my heart thudding in a way that made no sense for something so ordinary. That night, lying in the guest room below, I kept seeing that room in my head, replaying how the light had struck the glass bottles on the vanity, how my face had hovered there in the mirror looking oddly softer, almost curious. I told myself I was just bored, that I'd peeked into her room only because it was new territory. But boredom doesn't make your chest feel tight or your stomach flip. Something else was pulling me upstairs. The next day, I went back. My footsteps were hesitant, but the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt a strange calmness. I sat at the vanity, touching the edge of the mirror frame. A tube of lipstick lay open as if waiting for me. I lifted it, my hand trembling just slightly. The color was a muted rose, nothing loud, but when I twisted it up and imagined it against my mouth, my pulse quickened. I didn't apply it that day, but the thought of it haunted me the way a song does when you can't remember all the lyrics. I closed the drawer carefully and backed out of the room, but something had shifted. Upstairs was no longer just a room in my aunt's house. It was a door, and I had already opened it, even if only a crack. The second time felt different, more deliberate, like I was crossing a line I'd drawn for myself. My heart was racing as I climbed the narrow staircase, each step heavier and lighter at once. The air upstairs was warm and faintly perfumed, as if Lily's presence still lingered in the fabrics, in the scented lotions half used on the vanity. I pushed the door open quietly, even though the house was empty, as if someone might catch me mid-thought. The mirror waited, tall and rectangular, leaning slightly against the wall. I stood in front of it, staring at my reflection longer than I normally dared. It was strange to look at myself in silence, without the distraction of school, friends, or my phone. I studied my hair, too long for a boy by most standards, but it framed my face in a way I never really noticed before. I tugged at it, brushed it across my forehead, tilting my head side to side. There was a softness there, something that made me wonder what else might surface if I leaned into it instead of hiding. The drawer with the lipstick was easy to find. My hand shook as I twisted the tube, the rose-colored stick gleaming under the light. The idea of actually putting it on terrified me, but also thrilled me so sharply it almost hurt. I lifted it, holding my breath, and pressed it lightly against my lower lip. The texture surprised me, smooth, creamy, like a secret blooming on my skin. I dragged it clumsily across, then touched the upper lip. The lines were uneven, messy, but when I leaned closer to the mirror, my stomach flipped. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't wrong either. My face looked strange, yes, but also alive. Different in a way that made sense in a place words didn't reach. I laughed quietly, a nervous sound, and wiped at the smudge with a tissue. But no matter how much I rubbed, I could still see a faint trace of color. It was like a mark I couldn't fully erase, a whisper that said, "You did this. You wanted this." I sat there for a long time after, staring at myself with the lipstick hidden back in the drawer. A thought grew heavier with each passing minute. If something as small as a streak of color could shift my reflection so much, what would happen if I went further? I didn't answer myself then. I just closed the drawer, stood up too quickly, and nearly tripped over the chair as I rushed out of the room. But the truth was sealed. Something inside me had been stirred awake, and no amount of denial could put it back to sleep. That night, I dreamt of walking into that room again. Except this time, I wasn't sneaking or hiding. In the dream, the mirror didn't show me as I was, but as I wanted to be, though the image slipped away the moment I tried to hold on to it. I woke up breathless, the echo of that reflection burning like sunlight on my skin. The following day, I tried to avoid going upstairs. I told myself I had errands to do, books to finish, chores my aunt had left on her neatly written list. I swept the porch, watered the plants, and even sat outside pretending the heat didn't press down on me like a heavy blanket. But every time I looked at the house, my eyes drifted toward the top windows where Lily's curtains swayed lightly in the breeze. It was like the room was calling me, whispering my name in a voice I couldn't quite ignore. By mid-afternoon, the pull became unbearable. I climbed the stairs again, slower this time, as though delaying the inevitable might lessen the weight of what I was about to do. The door opened with the same soft creak, and the room greeted me like it always did, sunlight spilling over the vanity, the faint trace of perfume, the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. This time, I didn't stop at the mirror. My hands went to the closet, sliding the door open to reveal rows of clothes. Dresses in colors that caught the light, skirts with delicate patterns, tops that seemed almost impossibly soft. My chest tightened. I reached out and touched the hem of a pale yellow sundress, the fabric light and smooth between my fingers. It felt like something alive, humming with possibility. I hesitated for a long moment, the weight of choice pressing on me. Then, as though some invisible thread tugged me forward, I slipped the hanger off the rack. The dress dangled from my hands, fragile yet daring, an invitation I could either accept or refuse. My breath came shallow as I pulled my shirt over my head and set it aside. The air on my skin felt strange, as if the room itself was holding its breath along with me. When I lifted the dress, my hands trembled, but I stepped into it anyway. The fabric slid against me, unfamiliar but comforting. I tugged it up over my shoulders, fumbling with the straps, my pulse thundering in my ears. The fit was loose, of course, not made for me, but when I caught sight of myself in the mirror, my knees nearly gave out. The image staring back wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished or glamorous. The dress hung awkwardly, my hair unstyled, the lipstick from yesterday a faded ghost. And yet, there was something there. A glimpse of a version of me I had only felt in shadows and half-dreams. It was fragile, unfinished, but it was real. I stood frozen, torn between laughter and tears. My chest ached with something I didn't know how to name. For the first time, I felt as though I wasn't looking at a stranger in the mirror. I was looking at someone I could learn to recognize, someone I could maybe even grow into. The weight of that realization left me dizzy. I slipped out of the dress quickly, folding it with shaking hands and hanging it carefully back in its place. But the memory of it lingered against my skin, like sunlight that won't fade after you step out of its reach. The morning after, I felt restless in a way I couldn't disguise even from myself. I tried distracting my thoughts with breakfast, reading the paper, even stepping outside to watch the quiet street. But none of it worked. My body seemed to hum with leftover energy, as if the dress I had worn the day before still clung invisibly to me. It was like a song stuck in my head, one I couldn't silence until I heard it again. By noon, I was back upstairs. The door creaked open, and sunlight pooled across the floorboards like liquid gold. The room felt warmer than usual, almost conspiratorial, as if it knew what I was here for. I lingered at the closet again, fingers brushing the row of fabrics until I settled on something different this time. A skirt. It was a soft blue, patterned with faint white flowers, light enough to shift with the smallest breeze. I paired it with a plain white blouse that hung neatly on its hanger, the buttons small and pearly. My hands shook as I dressed, the process clumsy, but when I fastened the last button and turned toward the mirror, my throat tightened. The skirt swayed slightly as I moved, and the blouse softened the sharp lines of my shoulders. My reflection startled me not because it looked perfect, but because it looked possible. I sat at the vanity, staring at myself as I reached for the lipstick again. This time, I applied it more carefully, steadying my hand. The muted rose spread across my lips with more confidence, and I added a faint touch of blush from a compact, dusting my cheeks until a delicate warmth surfaced. The mirror didn't just show me, it showed a version of me that felt closer to truth than the person I'd been pretending to be all summer. My pulse pounded as I stood and took a few tentative steps across the room, watching the skirt sway, the blouse shift, my hair brushing against my cheeks. Each movement made the image in the mirror seem more alive, as though with every step I was slipping into a role that wasn't really a role at all. It was frightening, exhilarating, overwhelming. But with every breath, my excitement tangled with fear. What if someone came home early? What if a neighbor saw me through the window? What if, worse still, I couldn't stop wanting this? The thoughts rushed in like shadows, chasing the light I'd just found. My throat tightened, and I quickly began to undress, my hands clumsy, almost frantic. I folded everything neatly, restoring the room to the way it had been, as if erasing evidence of a crime. And yet, even as I stood there in my plain clothes again, the traces remained. A faint blush still dusted my cheeks, the lipstick still whispered on my lips. The mirror reflected both versions of me at once, the boy everyone thought I was, and the person just beginning to step into the light. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house seemed louder, every passing car a reminder of how exposed I might be if anyone knew. But under the fear, there was something stronger, a spark of anticipation, growing brighter by the hour. The following day, I promised myself I wouldn't go upstairs. I even left the house for a walk, trying to lose myself in the ordinary rhythm of a neighborhood. Children pedaling bikes down the sidewalk, sprinklers spraying arcs of water across neatly trimmed lawns, the sound of dogs barking behind fences. It all looked so normal, so steady, as if the world had no idea what storm was unraveling inside me. But by the time I returned, sweat clinging to my back and the sun already dipping lower in the sky, I felt the pull again. It wasn't boredom. It wasn't curiosity. It was need, sharp and undeniable, tugging me toward the staircase no matter how I tried to resist. Upstairs, the room welcomed me like it had been waiting. The sunlight was softer now, golden and forgiving, and the vanity gleamed faintly in the fading light. I went to the closet without hesitation this time, as though each visit made me bolder. My hands slid across the fabrics until they landed on a dress I hadn't noticed before, a soft lavender one with a gentle drape that seemed almost weightless. I held it up against myself in the mirror, my breath catching at how the color lit up my skin. It felt like something chosen for me, as if it had been waiting all along. My hands moved with less hesitation now, slipping out of my clothes, pulling the lavender fabric over my body. It settled around me with such ease it was almost frightening. At the vanity, I reached again for the lipstick, applying it more confidently than before. Then I brushed my hair forward, letting it frame my face, softening the edges that always felt too sharp. The mirror reflected back someone who looked less like an experiment and more like a story unfolding, one page at a time. I took a step back from the vanity, then another, and soon I was moving across the room in slow, deliberate circles, watching how the dress swayed with each turn. A laugh bubbled up light, startled, almost giddy. It was a sound I hadn't heard from myself in years, pure and uncalculated. But then, the sound of footsteps echoed faintly from outside. My body froze, my pulse spiking. Panic surged through me as I rushed to peel the dress away, nearly tangling myself in the fabric. I shoved it back onto its hanger, wiped frantically at my lips, and scrambled to restore everything before darting out of the room. When I reached the hallway, I paused, my chest heaving, my ears straining. The footsteps faded. It had only been a neighbor outside. No one had seen me. No one had known. Still, the adrenaline left me shaking as I collapsed onto the bed in the guest room downstairs. But beneath the fear, another realization settled. Even with the risk, even with the terror of being discovered, I had never felt more alive than I did in those moments upstairs. That truth terrified me, but it also rooted itself so deeply I knew there was no turning back. The next morning felt heavy, as if I'd carried the weight of lavender dreams all night. I tried to shake it off with chores, scrubbing dishes, folding laundry, sweeping the kitchen floor, but each task blurred, my hands moving automatically while my thoughts drifted to the upstairs room. Every sound, every shift of light seemed to remind me of it. The whisper of fabric, the warmth of sunlight through the curtains, the quiet click of the vanity drawer. I lasted until afternoon before climbing the stairs again. The air was still and thick, the room waiting in silence. I didn't go straight to the closet this time. Instead, I sat at the vanity and looked at myself, just me, unadorned. My face was plain, maybe even a little tired, but behind my eyes was a spark I hadn't seen before. It wasn't about the lipstick or the dress, it was about something stirring deeper, something that longed to breathe. Slowly, I opened the vanity drawers one by one, exploring what Lily had left behind. Brushes lined with stray hairs, tiny bottles of shimmering eyeshadow, compacts of powder, jars of cream. Each item felt like a secret tool, waiting for the right hands to give it life. I picked up a brush, bristled and soft, and ran it gently along my cheek. The sensation made me shiver, not from cold, but from recognition, like a puzzle piece finally sliding into place. After some hesitation, I chose a pale shade of eyeshadow and dabbed it onto my eyelids. My first attempt was clumsy, uneven, but as I blended it with trembling fingers, my eyes seemed to open wider, brighter, as if they'd been waiting for this all along. I added a faint line of eyeliner, smudged and imperfect, but the effect was undeniable. My reflection no longer looked like a stranger trying something reckless. It looked like someone testing a truth they had always known but never dared to say aloud. When I paired the makeup with the lavender dress again, the change was startling. My hands flew to my mouth, covering a sound I didn't recognize, a mix of laughter, surprise, and something dangerously close to tears. I turned from side to side, the mirror capturing angles of me I'd never seen before. Each glance felt like a promise, fragile but unshakable. But with the beauty came the fear. My heart hammered as I imagined someone opening the door, finding me like this. What excuse could I offer? How could I explain something even I didn't fully understand? The thought pressed down like a shadow, making the room feel smaller, tighter. I stripped the dress off quickly, wiping at my face with tissues until the traces of makeup faded. My skin burned from the friction, but I didn't stop until the mirror showed the old version of me again. I stuffed everything back into place, my breathing uneven, my chest aching with both relief and loss. Downstairs, I sat in silence for a long time, staring at my hands. They looked ordinary, but I knew better now. They had traced a line I could never erase. Upstairs wasn't just a room anymore. It was a beginning, and I had already crossed into it. The days began to blur together after that. I told myself each time would be the last, that I would leave Lily's room untouched, but the pull was relentless. By late afternoon, when the sun slanted through the upstairs windows, I found myself drifting up the staircase as though drawn by a current too strong to resist. One evening, the air was heavy with the scent of rain. Thunder rumbled far away, low and slow, like a warning I couldn't quite make out. I opened the closet and stood before the dresses, each one glowing faintly in the dim light. My hand hovered between them until it landed on a pale green dress with a delicate lace trim. It was softer than the lavender one, lighter, like the promise of spring after a long winter. When I pulled it on, the fit was loose at the shoulders, but when I caught my reflection in the mirror, I felt a sudden calm. The green caught the flecks in my eyes, softening them, and the lace traced patterns across my skin that made me want to stand taller, breathe deeper. I paired it with a dab of blush and a more careful sweep of eyeliner this time, my hand steadier from practice. The reflection that stared back was still imperfect, still rough around the edges, but unmistakably me. I couldn't stop smiling. Not the forced smile I gave teachers or neighbors, but something unguarded, alive. I spun once, slowly, the skirt of the dress whispering against my legs. My laughter filled the room, echoing louder than the distant thunder. For the first time, I felt like I belonged inside that mirror. But then the storm broke. Rain began to lash against the windows, and the sudden crash of thunder made me jump. My heart pounded as I glanced toward the door, half expecting someone to burst in. The sound of the storm was both comforting and terrifying. It cloaked me in privacy, but it also reminded me how fragile this sanctuary was. I hurried to remove the dress, folding it with trembling hands. My reflection faded back to the ordinary version of myself, the contrast sharper than ever. Downstairs, the house felt colder, darker, the walls echoing with the storm. I sat in the living room with the lights off, listening to the rain hammer the roof, replaying the image of myself in the green dress over and over until it etched into me like lightning. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something unsettling. The fear of being caught was growing, but so was the fear of never going back upstairs again. And between the two, the second was far more unbearable. The morning after the storm, the world felt freshly washed, the air cool and sharp with the scent of wet grass. I opened the windows downstairs and listened to the drip of rainwater sliding off the roof. It should have been calming, but instead, it made me restless, like the calm after chaos was somehow louder than the storm itself. By afternoon, I was climbing the stairs again, each creak of wood beneath my feet sounding like a confession. The room welcomed me with soft light spilling through curtains that still swayed from the open window. I lingered at the vanity first, brushing a strand of hair from my face and tilting my head. Something about the way my reflection looked curious, searching made me pause. I wasn't just experimenting anymore. I was learning who I was. This time, instead of choosing a dress immediately, I pulled open the drawers of the vanity again. My fingers found a bottle of nail polish bright red, the kind that demanded attention. I twisted it open and hesitated, the smell sharp and chemical, but thrilling. With a shaky breath, I painted one nail. The color gleamed under the light, bold and unapologetic. I stared at it for a long time, my heart pounding, before painting another, then another, until all 10 glowed with a color that seemed to shout the truth I'd been whispering. I flexed my hands, marveling at how something so small could make me feel so different. The red tips flashed against the pale green dress I slipped into again, the lace brushing softly against my skin. I paired it with a sweep of rose lipstick and a faint shimmer of shadow across my eyelids. The mirror reflected someone I couldn't dismiss anymore. She wasn't a ghost or a fleeting dream. She was here, staring back at me, waiting. I walked across the room, my nails catching the light as I touched the vanity, the chair, the closet door. Each movement felt heightened, charged, as if the room itself was applauding me for daring to go further. I sat at the vanity and just looked at myself, letting the moment stretch. My breath slowed, my chest loosening as I whispered aloud, though the sound startled me. This feels right. The words hung in the air like a secret I couldn't take back. They terrified me, but at the same time, they filled me with a warmth that spread through every corner of me. When I finally peeled the polish away with tissues and remover I found in the drawer, I felt a sting of loss, as though I was erasing something more than color. The green dress went back into the closet, the lipstick wiped away, the shimmer dulled. But no amount of cleaning could undo the truth of what I had spoken aloud. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, the words echoing in my head. This feels right. For the first time, I knew it wasn't just an experiment anymore. It was a beginning. The next few days fell into a rhythm I didn't plan but couldn't resist. Mornings were ordinary. I made breakfast, read, did the chores my aunt had left for me. But afternoons belonged to upstairs. As soon as the light shifted and the house grew quiet, I climbed the staircase with a heart that beat faster every time. Each day I dared a little more. One afternoon I tried on a soft pink blouse with sleeves that fluttered when I moved my arms. Another day I slipped into a navy skirt, the fabric brushing my knees in a way that sent shivers up my spine. Sometimes I paired outfits together, experimenting with combinations Lily had probably worn without thinking twice. But for me, each choice was monumental, like stepping deeper into a forest where every path was both frightening and beautiful. Makeup became less of an obstacle and more of a language. I learned how to blend shadows instead of smearing them, how to shape my lips more carefully, how to brush powder lightly so it didn't cling unevenly. I wasn't perfect, far from it, but the mirror no longer mocked me. It encouraged me, reflected back someone who looked more familiar each day. There were moments of pure joy. One afternoon, I twirled in a pale blue dress, the skirt fanning out, and I laughed so freely I startled myself. The sound was light, genuine, untouched by the weight I carried when I was downstairs. For those minutes, I wasn't pretending. I was living. But there were also moments of fear. Every creak of the house felt louder, every shadow in the window sharper. More than once, I froze in panic when a car passed outside, certain it would stop, certain someone would come knocking. The idea of being discovered left my stomach hollow, but the idea of giving this up felt worse. One evening, after dressing and carefully undoing everything, I caught sight of myself in the mirror in plain clothes again. The contrast was unbearable. The ordinary version of me looked faded, incomplete, like a character who had stepped out of a story and lost their meaning. My throat tightened as I realized something painful. I wasn't only discovering who I could be upstairs, I was also learning how much of myself I had hidden all this time. As I lay in bed that night, the cicadas droning outside, I felt both exhilarated and terrified. I didn't know where this was leading, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. There was no going back to the version of me that had walked into that room for the first time. By the time the week was over, the upstairs room no longer felt like Lily's. It wasn't mine either, not really, but it had become something in between, an in-between place where rules bent, where time seemed to stretch and soften, where I could breathe in a way I couldn't anywhere else. One afternoon, I decided to go further than ever before. The closet had become familiar, but I hadn't dared to touch the shoes stacked neatly at the bottom. Heels, flats, sandals, each pair looked like an artifact from another world. My hand hovered before finally picking up a pair of nude flats, simple but elegant, with a rounded toe that seemed less intimidating than the tall heels beside them. Sliding my feet into them was awkward at first. They pinched a little, the fit not quite mine. But as I stood in front of the mirror, the effect was undeniable. The line of my legs shifted, subtle but powerful. For the first time, my reflection felt anchored, not just clothes draped over me, not just makeup painted across my skin, but something that reached all the way down to the ground I stood on. I paired the flats with the pale blue dress I loved most, adding a careful layer of lipstick and blush. Then I brushed my hair until it fell softer around my face, catching the light. When I stood back, the girl in the mirror startled me with how whole she looked. Not flawless, not finished, but whole. Like she had always been there, waiting for me to give her room. I took a few steps across the room, the flats clicking softly against the wood floor. Each step felt more real than the last, a rhythm that matched the racing of my heart. I laughed again, twirling once, watching the skirt flare out, the shoes grounding me even as I spun. Then came the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My laughter froze in my throat, my body stiff with panic. I darted to the window, heart hammering, only to see a delivery truck pulling away, leaving a package on the porch. Relief crashed over me, but it left me trembling, the echo of fear still clinging to my skin. I stripped everything off too quickly, fumbling with buttons, nearly stumbling as I kicked the shoes away. When I looked in the mirror again, the boy who stared back seemed hollow, the sparkle drained. I whispered under my breath, almost angrily, "I don't want to be him." The words scared me the moment they left my lips, but they also felt truer than anything I'd ever said. I didn't know what they meant, not fully. But I knew enough. The person I was upstairs was not an illusion. She was real, and every day I spent in that room, she was learning how to live. After the scare with the delivery truck, I became more cautious, but strangely, more determined. The risk of discovery pressed heavier on me, yet it only seemed to sharpen the sweetness of those upstairs hours. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of a car outside made my pulse leap, but instead of running, I lingered longer. It was as if the possibility of being caught made the experience feel more alive. That afternoon, I decided to try something I hadn't dared before: an entire look, complete, from head to toe. Not just one dress or blouse, not just lipstick and blush, but everything together. I wanted to see if I could create a version of myself that didn't look like a boy in borrowed clothes, but someone who could stand in her own right. I chose a soft cream-colored blouse with delicate buttons and paired it with a pleated skirt the color of dusk, a muted violet that swayed gracefully as I pulled it on. The fit was closer this time, less like a costume and more like clothing that belonged to me. I slipped into the nude flats again, steadying myself as I stood taller, straighter. At the vanity, I took my time. Powder first, dusting lightly until my skin looked even. Then a careful sweep of eyeshadow, soft brown at the edges, shimmering ivory near the corners. Eyeliner next, my hand steadier than before, the line not perfect but close enough to make my eyes look brighter. A touch of mascara, a blush that warmed my cheeks, and finally, the rose lipstick I had grown to trust. When I finished and looked up, I couldn't breathe for a moment. The girl staring back wasn't polished like the ones in magazines, but she was present. She was me. Her eyes were wide with wonder, her lips curved in the faintest of smiles, as though she had just stepped out of hiding and realized the world was bigger than she'd been told. I stood and walked across the room, each step a careful rehearsal of who I was becoming. The skirt swayed gently, the flats tapped softly, my reflection following me in the tall mirror. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was pretending. I felt like I had uncovered a truth that had been buried under years of silence. But as I sat back down, the weight of reality pressed in. Downstairs, the house waited with its ordinary rhythms. Outside, the world carried on, expecting me to step into the role I had always played. My throat tightened at the thought of walking out of this room, of wiping away what I had created, of burying her again. I touched the mirror softly, tracing the edge of my reflection with one fingertip. "I see you," I whispered, the words trembling but certain. The next day began with a strange sense of anticipation, as though the whole house was leaning toward the afternoon when I would finally climb the stairs again. I tried to ignore it, but the thought lingered behind everything I did: when I washed the dishes, when I stepped out into the yard, when I sat in the guest room pretending to read. Every clock tick seemed to draw me closer. By the time the sun shifted high and the cicadas began their steady drone, I was already moving upstairs. The room greeted me with its familiar warmth, the faint scent of perfume still in the air. But today, I didn't go straight to the closet or the vanity. Instead, I sat on the bed, staring at the space around me. I realized that this wasn't just about clothes or makeup anymore, it was about the feeling. The calm, the excitement, the deep, almost aching relief of being here. Still, the clothes called to me, and I couldn't resist their pull. Today, I chose something bolder, a floral dress with shades of coral and ivory, the pattern lively and bright, unlike anything I had worn before. Slipping into it was like stepping into sunlight. The fabric swirled as I moved, making me feel lighter, freer, as if the storm inside me had finally cleared. At the vanity, I leaned closer to the mirror, steady and deliberate. I picked a lipstick a little darker than usual, more daring, and applied it slowly, savoring the transformation. A hint of blush, a careful brush of eyeliner, and there she was again, more confident this time, less hesitant. My reflection didn't look like an experiment anymore. She looked like a possibility I couldn't ignore. I stood and walked across the room, pausing in front of the tall mirror, turning from side to side. The dress shimmered with movement, my reflection almost glowing in the afternoon light. A sudden thought gripped me. What if I stepped outside like this? Even just for a moment, even just into the hallway? The idea sent a thrill through me, equal parts terror and longing. My hand rested on the doorknob, the weight of the choice pressing hard. My heart thudded so loud I was sure someone could hear it, even though the house was silent. I twisted the knob halfway before fear clawed back, pulling me into retreat. I let go, the door clicking shut, my breath shaky. I sank into the vanity chair again, my hands trembling against my lap. I wasn't ready. Not yet. But the thought of it wouldn't leave me, it clung like a shadow, whispering of a freedom I had never dared to imagine before. That evening, as I sat downstairs in the guest room, the image of myself in the floral dress wouldn't leave me. It lingered like an afterimage from staring at the sun, still glowing even when I closed my eyes. I turned pages of a book without reading them, my thoughts trapped upstairs, replaying the moment my hand had touched the doorknob. The idea of stepping outside the room terrified me, but it also burned inside me with a quiet determination. The room had become a sanctuary, but sanctuaries can also become cages. What was the point of creating this version of myself if she could only live between four walls? The next day, I decided to test my courage in small steps. I climbed upstairs as usual, my pulse racing before I even reached the door. I chose the lavender dress again, the one that felt like it understood me best, and slipped into it with familiar ease. At the vanity, I painted on the muted rose lipstick, dusted my cheeks with blush, brushed my hair until it framed my face softly. My reflection smiled back, nervous but encouraging. When I stood, I went straight to the door. My hand hovered over the knob, the weight of the choice almost unbearable. The hallway stretched beyond it, empty, silent, but full of risk. I twisted the knob and pulled the door open a crack, the creak echoing like thunder in the quiet house. I stepped out. Just one step, onto the landing. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst, but the world didn't collapse. No one came running. The house was still, the afternoon sun slanting through the hallway windows. I stood there, frozen, then took another step. The skirt swayed against my legs, the lipstick still warm on my lips. I was no longer just inside the room. I was outside, even if only by a few feet. It felt like crossing a line, invisible but enormous. I stood there for a full minute before rushing back inside, closing the door behind me and leaning against it, breathless. My chest ached, but it wasn't fear alone, it was exhilaration. I had done it. As I sat back down at the vanity, my reflection seemed different somehow. Stronger. She wasn't just a secret anymore. She was growing, taking up space, daring me to let her out further. The next morning, I woke with a strange clarity. The fear that usually lingered in my chest had softened, replaced by a determination I didn't entirely understand. It was as though that one step into the hallway had opened something inside me that couldn't be closed again. I went about the morning routine: toast, tea, a half-hearted attempt to read the paper, but my mind was already upstairs. By the time the sunlight reached its golden angle, I was climbing the steps, each creak beneath my feet sounding less like a warning and more like an invitation. This time, I didn't hesitate at the closet. I chose the navy skirt I had worn once before and paired it with the soft cream blouse that made me feel gentle and composed. The nude flats slipped on easily, and at the vanity, I worked carefully, painting each stroke of eyeliner, each sweep of powder, until the reflection looking back seemed more practiced, more polished than ever.
She wasn't tentative now. She was steady.
When I stood and faced the door, I didn't linger with my hand trembling on the knob. I turned it smoothly and stepped into the hallway with deliberate movements. The house was still, but this time, I didn't freeze. I walked down the length of the hall, each step echoing softly, the skirt brushing against my knees. It felt surreal, like walking through a dream where I was both terrified of waking and desperate to stay asleep. I paused at the top of the stairs, staring down at the landing below. My heart hammered as I gripped the banister, the possibility of going further pressing against me like a dare.
But fear held me back. What if someone walked past outside and saw through a window? What if a car pulled into the driveway? I couldn't risk it. Not yet.
Still, standing there, looking down at the staircase, I felt a sense of triumph.
I had taken more than a step now.
I had claimed the hallway, a space that had always belonged to the ordinary version of me. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of things, but it was everything to me in that moment. When I returned to the room, I didn't strip out of the clothes right away. Instead, I sat on the bed in full dress, shoes and all, and just breathed. For the first time, I let myself sit in it without rushing, without panicking. The quiet stretched around me, not suffocating but comforting. I whispered softly to the still air, "I want more." And I knew it wasn't just about clothes, or makeup, or even the room.
It was about life.
That evening, as the cicadas hummed outside and the last traces of sunlight painted the walls gold, I kept thinking about how far I had gone. Just a week ago, I could barely bring myself to touch a tube of lipstick, and now I was walking the hallway in a skirt and blouse, breathing as if I belonged there. The progress thrilled me, but it also scared me. If I was changing this quickly, where would it end? The next day, the temptation grew impossible to resist. After lunch, I climbed upstairs with a restless urgency, as though the house itself was urging me along. When I stepped into the room, I went straight to the closet and chose something daring, a white dress with a flowing hemline and a neckline traced with delicate embroidery. It was elegant, almost too much for an afternoon alone, but I wanted to see myself in it. Slipping into the dress felt like slipping into air. The fabric floated around me, light and graceful, settling against my skin with a gentleness that nearly brought tears to my eyes. I paired it with the flats again, then spent longer at the vanity than ever before, brushing my hair into shape, applying eyeliner with a steady hand, smoothing blush until it looked natural. When I finished with a darker shade of lipstick than usual, I caught my reflection and froze.
She looked radiant.
Not perfect, not flawless, but radiant. The girl in the mirror was smiling softly, her eyes shining with something like pride. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to compare her to anyone else.
She was enough.
I stood and walked the hallway again, the white dress swishing gently with each step. The light caught the embroidery and made it shimmer faintly, as though the fabric itself carried secrets. I stopped at the top of the stairs once more, staring down at the living room below. My body trembled, caught between fear and longing. I wanted to go further, to descend the stairs, to let her walk into the world outside the bedroom. But I couldn't.
Not yet.
Instead, I stood there for a long time, the dress glowing in the soft afternoon light, my reflection in the hallway mirror catching me at an angle I had never seen before. It made me gasp, my hand flying to my mouth. The sight was so real, so natural, it didn't feel like disguise at all.
It felt like recognition.
When I finally returned to the room, I didn't take the dress off. I sat on the bed, hugging my knees, and let the fabric pool around me. For once, I wasn't rushing to hide. I let myself exist in that moment, fully, vulnerably, without apology. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered, "One day, you will take that step down the stairs." The following morning, I woke with a white dress still vivid in my mind, as though it had imprinted itself onto my thoughts. I couldn't shake the image of myself standing at the top of the stairs, frozen between fear and freedom. It haunted me, but not in a way that hurt, more like a reminder, a promise I hadn't yet kept. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that stretched endlessly in summer. Outside, the air shimmered with heat, cicadas already buzzing though it wasn't even noon. I moved through the day like a ghost, waiting for the right moment to slip upstairs again. When it finally came, I entered the room almost reverently. I didn't rush to the closet this time. Instead, I walked slowly, brushing my hand against the vanity, the bedpost, the edge of the mirror, as if grounding myself in the reality of this sanctuary. Then I opened the closet doors and chose carefully, a light peach sundress with small buttons running down the front. It was simple, airy, perfect for the heat pressing against the windows. As I slipped it on, the fabric cooled my skin, the skirt brushing gently against my thighs. It wasn't as grand as the white dress, but it felt honest, effortless. I paired it with the flats again and then sat at the vanity, keeping the makeup lighter this time, just powder, a brush of blush, mascara, and a soft coral lipstick. The effect was fresh, casual, almost as if I could step outside and no one would question me.
That thought startled me. Outside. The word echoed in my head like a dare.
I shook it off quickly, focusing instead on the reflection smiling back.
She looked at ease, natural in a way that surprised me.
I stood, walked the hallway again, and this time, I didn't stop at the top of the stairs. I placed one hand on the railing, my heart hammering, and set one foot down onto the first step. The wood creaked softly, and I froze, breath caught in my throat.
The world didn't end. The house didn't shatter.
I took another step, then another, until I was halfway down the staircase. The sunlight from the living room window spilled across the stairs, illuminating the peach fabric, making it glow. For a moment, I stood there, halfway between two worlds, the safety of the room upstairs and the unknown of the house below. My hands trembled on the railing, but inside, I felt a spark of victory.
I didn't go further that day.
I turned back, climbing quickly, retreating into the familiar warmth of the room. But the taste of those steps lingered in my chest, electric and undeniable. I had crossed another invisible boundary, and I knew there would be no turning back from the desire for more.
The staircase became an obsession after that.
Each night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the moment I had stood halfway down, the sunlight pooling across the peach dress, the railing cool beneath my hands. It was like a dream I wanted to slip back into, but this time go further, all the way to the bottom. When the next afternoon arrived, the pull was irresistible. I climbed the stairs with my pulse racing, every step charged with anticipation. I didn't hesitate long at the closet. Today I reached for the floral dress again, the coral and ivory one that made me feel alive. The way it flared around me when I moved gave me courage, as if the fabric itself was whispering to be bold. I sat at the vanity, hands steadier than ever as I applied a bolder shade of lipstick, darker than what I usually wore. My reflection seemed to approve, her eyes brighter, her smile tinged with mischief. She looked like someone who could do daring things, someone who belonged at the foot of the staircase and beyond. When I stepped into the hallway, I didn't stop to second-guess myself. The dress brushed against my legs as I moved with deliberate steps toward the stairs.
This time, I didn't pause at the first step or the second.
I descended slowly but steadily, my breath sharp and fast, until my feet touched the floor of the living room.
I froze there, overwhelmed.
The room looked familiar, but it felt utterly transformed. To stand there dressed as her, not just upstairs in secret, but downstairs, in the heart of the house, was dizzying. I touched the arm of the sofa as though to anchor myself, my fingers trembling against the fabric. The sunlight poured through the window, catching the colors of the dress and casting soft shadows across the floor. I stood in it, bathed in the glow, and for the first time, the girl inside me wasn't confined to one hidden room. She was here, in the open, filling the space with her presence.
The thrill was intoxicating, but so was the fear. What if someone walked past outside and saw through the window?
What if the sound of the screen door opening announced an unexpected visitor? Every possibility felt like a danger waiting to pounce. My chest tightened, and I quickly hurried back up the stairs, closing the bedroom door behind me. But even as I sat back down at the vanity, heart pounding, I knew something had changed. The downstairs wasn't out of reach anymore. It had been claimed, however briefly. And the thought of stepping further, maybe even outside, began to shimmer in my mind, impossible to ignore. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself standing in the living room, the floral dress glowing in the sunlight, the silence of the house pressing in around me. It had felt so impossible, yet I had done it. The memory was both exhilarating and tormenting, because it made me want more. By morning, I had already decided. I would go further. The thought scared me, but it also made my heart race with a kind of joy I had never known. I went through the motions of breakfast half distracted, my mind already planning the next steps upstairs. When the hour finally came, I climbed the stairs quickly, a nervous energy carrying me forward. At the closet, I chose carefully. Today it would be the white embroidered dress again. There was something about its lightness, its flowing elegance, that gave me courage. As I slipped it on, I felt almost untouchable, like the fabric carried a quiet strength within its threads.
At the vanity, I took extra time.
Foundation, blush, eyeliner, mascara, the motions had become almost natural now, each stroke a familiar ritual. I chose a deep rose lipstick, applied it slowly, and when I looked up, my reflection took my breath away. She looked poised, determined, as if she too knew what was coming. I walked the hallway with purpose and descended the stairs without stopping. The dress floated with each step, catching the sunlight as I moved into the living room. I stood there again, but this time I didn't freeze. I crossed the room slowly, the flats tapping softly against the floorboards. When I reached the window, I hesitated. The sunlight poured through, illuminating everything. If anyone happened to pass by outside, they might see me. My hand trembled as I reached for the curtain, pulling it just enough to peek through. The street outside was empty, still in the heat of the afternoon. Relief washed over me, though it didn't ease the pounding of my heart. I let the curtain fall and turned back to the room. For the first time, I sat on the sofa in my dress, smoothing the fabric over my knees, my hands shaking slightly. The cushions sank beneath me, and I realized how monumental this moment was. This wasn't upstairs, hidden away. This was the heart of the house. I sat there for several minutes, listening to the cicadas outside, the creak of the house settling. I felt both small and powerful at once, as though I had stolen a secret freedom that the world didn't yet know about. When I finally returned upstairs, my chest still tight with adrenaline, I knew there was no undoing this. Each step only led to another, and the thought I had tried to push away before now came back sharper, clearer, impossible to ignore. One day soon, I would have to open the door to the outside. The idea of stepping outside clung to me like a shadow. I tried to brush it away, convincing myself that what I had already done was enough. Upstairs, the hallway, the stairs, even the living room, it was already more than I'd ever dreamed possible. But every time I looked at the door leading to the yard, my chest tightened with longing. The next afternoon, I stood in front of the closet longer than usual, fingers brushing over the fabrics as if they could answer the question for me. What should I wear if I dared go beyond the walls of the house? I finally chose the peach sundress, the one that felt simple and effortless. It wasn't dramatic like the white dress, nor bold like the floral one. It was quiet, like a secret, and that felt right for this step. As I buttoned it up, the fabric whispered against my skin, light and airy in the summer heat. I slipped on the flats, then moved to the vanity. My hands trembled as I worked through the makeup powder, a faint blush, mascara, a coral lipstick to match the dress. When I leaned back to look at the mirror, she stared at me with wide eyes, as nervous as I was. I descended the stairs slowly, each creak making me pause, listening for sounds outside. When I reached the living room, I crossed to the back door and stood in front of it, my hand hovering just inches from the knob. The sunlight streamed through the glass pane, dazzling against the pale fabric of the dress, as though the world outside was calling. My heart raced. I could imagine it so clearly, stepping into the yard, feeling the summer air brush against my skin, the sun warming the top of my head. But the dangers rushed in just as quickly. What if a neighbor saw? What if someone drove by? What if the world knew? I pressed my palm flat against the glass, the warmth of the sun radiating through. It was so close, just on the other side of a thin pane and a single turn of the knob. I stood there for what felt like forever, the cicadas buzzing, the silence inside the house deafening. But in the end, I couldn't do it. Not yet. My hand fell away, and I backed into the room, my breath shaky, my knees weak. I hurried upstairs and sank onto the bed, burying my face in my hands. Even though I hadn't opened the door, something still felt different. The decision hadn't been made, but the pull was stronger than ever. I knew the day was coming when I wouldn't just press my palm against the glass. I would step outside and let the world see her. The following days passed in a restless blur. I kept replaying the moment at the back door, my palm pressed against the glass, the sunlight warming it from the other side, the choice hovering just out of reach. It was maddening. I had crossed so many invisible lines already, but this last one felt like a wall too high to climb. Still, the thought wouldn't leave me. It seeped into every part of my day. When I washed the dishes, I caught myself glancing out the window, imagining walking past in a dress. When I sat reading in the guest room, my mind wandered to the feel of the summer air brushing against my skin. The outside world, once frightening, now shimmered in my imagination like a promise. On the third day, I climbed the stairs with trembling determination. I chose the lavender dress this time, the one that had always felt like it understood me best. Its gentle sway and soft color gave me courage, and as I pulled it on, I felt steadier than I had in days. At the vanity, I applied makeup with care, keeping it natural, as though I really might step out where someone could see. A soft rose lipstick, a touch of blush, mascara to frame my eyes. When I descended the stairs, the lavender skirt whispering around my legs, I didn't pause in the living room. I went straight to the back door and stood before it. My hand gripped the knob, my breath sharp and shallow. The air outside seemed to hum, as if the world was aware of my hesitation. I twisted the knob. The latch clicked softly, and the door gave way an inch. A rush of warm air slipped inside, carrying the scent of grass and sun. My chest tightened at the sensation. It was real, no longer just an idea. I pushed the door open wider, just enough to step onto the threshold. My flats brushed the edge where the coolness of the indoors met the heat of the outdoors. I froze there, half in and half out, my pulse drumming in my ears. For a moment, I dared one more step. The sole of my shoe pressed into the sunlit concrete, and the warmth seeped through. The world didn't explode. No neighbor appeared. No car rolled by. The yard stretched quiet and golden before me. I stood there, trembling, the lavender dress shifting slightly in the breeze. It was the smallest of steps, but it was everything. I was outside. Not fully, not boldly walking into the street, but beyond the safety of the walls, where the air was real and the sunlight touched me without hesitation. I didn't linger long. Fear tugged me back, and I slipped inside quickly, shutting the door behind me. But as I pressed my back against it, gasping for breath, a smile spread across my face. I had done it. The world hadn't ended. And now I knew it never would. The air outside had clung to me long after I closed the door. That brief step into sunlight replayed in my head again and again, each time sweeter, more intoxicating. It was as if I had unlocked a secret I had been craving all along. I could still feel the warmth against my skin, the way the lavender dress had moved in the faint summer breeze. The following day, I didn't wait until afternoon. By mid-morning, the urge was already pressing too heavily to ignore. I climbed upstairs with determined steps, heart pounding with anticipation rather than hesitation. At the closet, I chose the white embroidered dress. If I was going to go further, I wanted to wear something that made me feel radiant. As I slipped into it, I felt the same weightless grace as before, the fabric flowing softly around me. At the vanity, I gave myself more time, painting carefully, deliberately foundation, blush, eyeliner, mascara, and a soft but confident lipstick. My reflection smiled back at me with an energy I had never seen in her before. She looked alive, like she was ready to belong in the sunlight. When I descended the stairs, the dress trailing lightly with each step, I felt less like I was sneaking and more like I was preparing for a small ceremony. The back door gleamed in the light, and I didn't hesitate as I reached for the knob. The latch clicked, and warm air brushed across my face, inviting, insistent. This time, I stepped fully outside. Both feet on the patio, the sun wrapping me in its heat, the air carrying the scent of grass and faint blossoms. My chest tightened, but not with fear, more with awe. I turned slowly, feeling the skirt of the dress catch the light, and for the first time, I saw her not in a mirror, but reflected in the world itself. The yard was quiet, the street beyond still, no neighbors in sight. I walked a few steps across the patio, the flats tapping softly against the concrete. Each step was surreal, the air tugging at the hem of my dress, the sunlight warming the back of my neck. I reached out and touched the wooden railing, grounding myself, smiling at the sheer impossibility of what I was doing. I didn't stay long, just a minute or two, but it was enough. Enough to feel the world embrace me, enough to know that I wasn't confined to a single room anymore. When I finally slipped back inside and shut the door, my heart was racing, my hands trembling. But my smile didn't fade. I sat at the bottom of the stairs, clutching the fabric of the dress in my hands, and whispered aloud to the empty house, "She's real. She's really real." The memory of stepping into the sunlight stayed with me like a spark under my skin. I carried it everywhere, replaying the moment I stood on the patio, the dress moving in the breeze, the warmth settling across my shoulders. For the first time, it felt less like I was borrowing someone else's life and more like I was living my own. The following day, I felt restless from the moment I woke. Breakfast tasted bland, the book in my hands unread. My thoughts kept circling back upstairs, to the closet and the vanity, to the door that led outside. It was no longer enough to imagine, I wanted to feel it again.
When the hour came, I didn't hesitate.
I chose the peach sundress, the one that felt casual and airy, almost ordinary. There was something comforting in its simplicity, as if it belonged to the rhythm of summer itself. I slipped it on, buttoning each fastening carefully, before sliding into the flats. At the vanity, I kept the makeup light but fresh, a sweep of powder, a soft blush, mascara, and coral lipstick to match the dress. My reflection looked less like someone playing dress-up and more like someone ready to meet the day. I smiled at her, and she smiled back with quiet determination. Down the stairs I went, the sundress swaying gently, and to the back door without pause. The latch clicked open, and I stepped outside again, this time with less hesitation. The air wrapped around me immediately, warm and alive, and I closed my eyes for a moment to feel it fully. Then, slowly, I walked further across the patio, my flats tapping against the concrete, until I reached the grass. The blades brushed softly against the edge of my shoes, the scent of summer filling my lungs. I dared a few more steps, the dress catching the breeze, my heart pounding but my smile growing. I didn't go far, just a few paces into the yard, but standing there felt monumental. The world was vast around me, and yet I was still here, whole, unharmed, the sunlight pouring across my shoulders as if it had been waiting for me. I turned back toward the house, catching sight of my reflection faintly in the glass of the door. It startled me seeing her out here, not confined to a mirror, but part of a living world.
For a moment, I couldn't breathe.
She looked free. When I finally stepped back inside, the cool air of the house met me like a sigh. I sat at the kitchen table in full dress, the sunlight still warming my skin, and realized something quietly profound. This wasn't just about what I wore anymore.
It was about where I belonged.
The yard had been a threshold, and once I crossed it, the walls of the house seemed smaller. It wasn't that they had lost their comfort, they still felt safe, still wrapped me in quiet protection, but they no longer felt like the limit of what was possible. The world outside was waiting, and I could no longer pretend it wasn't. That evening, I couldn't stop replaying the sight of my reflection in the glass, faint and shimmering against the sunlight. It was as if I had caught a glimpse of the life I had always been meant to live, a life that stretched far beyond the second-floor room and the closet upstairs. The next day, I returned to the ritual with more care than ever. I chose the navy skirt and the cream blouse, the combination that made me feel composed, graceful, and steady. Slipping into them felt like putting on armor, not heavy or stifling, but protective in a way that let me stand taller. At the vanity, I applied makeup with a careful hand, balancing restraint with presence, soft eyeliner, a light blush, mascara, and a rose lipstick that brought warmth to my face. My reflection stared back at me with something new in her eyes, not just curiosity, not just longing, but quiet resolve. I walked downstairs with deliberate steps, the skirt swaying with every movement, and went straight to the back door. The moment I opened it, the air rushed in, carrying the warmth of the day. This time, I stepped fully into the yard without pause, my flats brushing against the grass, the blouse shifting slightly in the breeze. I stood there for several minutes, turning slowly, watching how the sunlight caught the fabric, how the wind teased at the hem of my skirt. It was surreal, like inhabiting a dream I had once thought unreachable. The world was ordinary, the trees swayed, a bird darted past, the cicadas buzzed, but standing there dressed as her made it extraordinary. For a brief, daring moment, I walked further, closer to the edge of the yard where the fence met the street. My pulse quickened with every step, my eyes darting nervously toward the empty road.
I didn't go all the way. I wasn't ready for that. But I lingered near the fence long enough to feel the thrill of how close I was. When I finally returned inside, I didn't rush upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water, sitting at the table in full dress. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, falling across the navy fabric, and for the first time, I felt less like I was hiding and more like I was living. That night, as I lay in bed, the thought pressed deeper than ever. Maybe it wasn't just about stepping outside. Maybe one day, it would be about stepping among people unafraid, unhidden. Each day seemed to blur into the next, but within me, everything was shifting. The secret afternoons upstairs had transformed into walks across the yard, and each step seemed to whisper that there was still further to go. The thought was both terrifying and magnetic. I couldn't stop imagining what it would be like to go beyond the fence, to take just a few steps down the street. When the next afternoon arrived, I climbed the stairs with a mix of nervousness and excitement. At the closet, I hesitated.
Every dress and blouse seemed to carry a different meaning now, some bold, some soft, some daring. Today, I wanted something that could blend into the summer world outside. I chose the floral dress, the coral and ivory one that felt alive with movement and color. Slipping into it felt like stepping into a season, as though the fabric itself belonged beneath the sun. I paired it with the nude flats, then sat at the vanity, hands trembling slightly as I applied makeup. A little more color this time, shimmer at the corners of my eyes, a sweep of blush to catch the light, and the darker rose lipstick that made me feel brave. My reflection smiled back at me, nervous but ready. I descended the stairs quickly, before I could second-guess myself, and opened the back door. The air rushed around me, warm and humming with cicadas. I stepped into the yard, the floral dress catching the breeze, and moved slowly toward the fence. Each step felt monumental, as though the ground itself was shifting beneath me. When I reached the edge, I paused, my fingers brushing the wooden boards. The street beyond was still, the afternoon quiet. My pulse raced so hard it hurt, but I couldn't stop staring at the road. Just one step more, I thought. Just one. But fear tightened its grip, and I stayed where I was. I couldn't do it, not yet. Instead, I lingered at the fence, letting the sunlight drape across me, the dress glowing in the brightness. For a moment, it felt like enough being this close, daring to stand in plain view of the world, even if no one was looking. When I returned inside, my hands were still shaking, but my smile was wide. I had almost done it. I had almost stepped beyond the final line. And deep down, I knew it wouldn't be long before I tried again, because the thought of staying inside the fence forever was no longer possible. That night, I barely slept. The image of the street beyond the fence burned in my mind, sharper than any dream. I had stood there, so close, the sunlight on my shoulders, the world only a single step away. It was unbearable to think I had retreated. The next morning, I woke with my heart already racing. I went through the motions of the day, washing dishes, pretending to read, yet every sound outside felt louder, every shadow through the curtains sharper. It was as if the world itself was taunting me, asking if I would ever be brave enough to meet it. When the afternoon light turned golden, I climbed the stairs quickly, driven by something stronger than hesitation. At the closet, my hand went immediately to the lavender dress. It had always felt like mine, soft and reassuring, the one that seemed to carry a quiet courage in every fold of its fabric. I slipped into it, the material settling around me like an embrace. At the vanity, I worked slowly, carefully powdered to even my skin, blush to warm my cheeks, eyeliner steady along the lash line, mascara to frame my eyes. I chose the muted rose lipstick again, the shade that seemed to whisper both gentleness and resolve. When I looked up, my reflection gazed back at me steadily. She was nervous, yes, but she was ready. Down the stairs I went, the lavender skirt brushing my legs, and straight through the back door into the warm air. I crossed the yard without pausing, each step firmer than the last, until I reached the fence. My breath caught, but I didn't stop. My hand pushed against the gate, and it gave way with a soft creak. The street lay open before me, empty, quiet, bathed in the glow of late afternoon. My pulse thundered in my ears, but my body moved forward. One foot, then the other, until I was standing on the sidewalk outside the yard. The world didn't collapse. No one appeared to stare. It was just me, the lavender dress swaying in the warm breeze, the sound of cicadas rising like a chorus all around. I took a few cautious steps down the sidewalk, each one unreal, like walking in a dream. The flats tapped softly against the pavement, the sun warming my shoulders, the air alive with summer. For a fleeting moment, I wasn't hiding, wasn't confined, I was simply there, existing in the open, the girl I had always seen in the mirror, now a part of the world. I didn't go far. My courage faltered quickly, and I turned back, slipping through the gate, across the yard, and into the safety of the house. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt, but my lips curled into a trembling smile. I had done it. The line had been crossed. And there was no going back. The moment I stepped onto the sidewalk had changed everything. It was only a handful of steps, no farther than the distance from the kitchen to the living room, and yet it felt like I had crossed into another version of myself. I could still feel the pavement under my flats, the warmth of the sun, the dizzying freedom of not being hidden by walls or fences. That evening, I sat at my desk in my room long after I had changed back into ordinary clothes. The lavender dress lay folded neatly on the chair beside me, but its presence was heavy, as if it was still wrapped around me. My hands trembled as I traced the edge of the fabric.
I couldn't stop whispering to myself. I did it. I really did it. But alongside the joy came fear. If I had been seen, what then? A neighbor glancing out their window, a passerby walking their dog, it would have shattered me. The thought kept circling in my mind, alternating between dread and a strange thrill. The risk had made it real, and reality was a fire I both feared and craved. The next day, I told myself I wouldn't do it again. I promised I would stay inside, keep safe. Yet as the sun climbed higher and the cicadas sang, the promise weakened. By afternoon, I was already standing at the closet, hands brushing over fabrics, heart pounding in my chest. This time, I chose the navy skirt and cream blouse. They felt poised, composed less like a burst of color and more like a quiet confidence. Dressing was no longer a frantic rush. It was a ritual, slow and deliberate. Each button fastened was like sealing a vow, each brushstroke of makeup a steadying breath. When I finally stepped outside again, the world looked the same: sunlight, trees, empty road, but it felt different. I crossed the yard and opened the gate, stepping onto the sidewalk with a steadier breath. My flats tapped against the pavement as I walked farther this time, maybe 10 steps, then 15. My pulse roared in my ears, but the fear felt thinner, weaker, less able to hold me back. I turned, glanced at the house behind me, and for the first time, I realized how small it looked from out here, how different it was to be on the other side of its walls. 4 years, it had been my whole world, and yet here I was, in a place where that world couldn't contain me. When I finally hurried back, shutting the gate behind me, the nervous trembling returned. But under it all was something else, something stronger: pride. I hadn't just dreamed of walking outside, I had walked. I had lived it. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered a quiet truth into the darkness, one that frightened me even as it comforted me. This isn't just a game anymore. This is who I am. The moment I stepped onto the sidewalk had changed everything. It was only a handful of steps, no farther than the distance from the kitchen to the living room, and yet it felt like I had crossed into another version of myself. I could still feel the pavement under my flats, the warmth of the sun, the dizzying freedom of not being hidden by walls or fences. That evening, I sat at my desk in my room long after I had changed back into ordinary clothes. The lavender dress lay folded neatly on the chair beside me, but its presence was heavy, as if it was still wrapped around me. My hands trembled as I traced the edge of the fabric. I couldn't stop whispering to myself. I did it. I really did it. But alongside the joy came fear. If I had been seen, what then? A neighbor glancing out their window, a passerby walking their dog, it would have shattered me. The thought kept circling in my mind, alternating between dread and a strange thrill. The risk had made it real, and reality was a fire I both feared and craved. The next day, I told myself I wouldn't do it again. I promised I would stay inside, keep safe. Yet as the sun climbed higher and the cicadas sang, the promise weakened. By afternoon, I was already standing at the closet, hands brushing over fabrics, heart pounding in my chest. This time, I chose the navy skirt and cream blouse. They felt poised, composed less like a burst of color and more like a quiet confidence. Dressing was no longer a frantic rush. It was a ritual, slow and deliberate. Each button fastened was like sealing a vow, each brushstroke of makeup a steadying breath. When I finally stepped outside again, the world looked the same: sunlight, trees, empty road, but it felt different. I crossed the yard and opened the gate, stepping onto the sidewalk with a steadier breath. My flats tapped against the pavement as I walked farther this time, maybe 10 steps, then 15. My pulse roared in my ears, but the fear felt thinner, weaker, less able to hold me back. I turned, glanced at the house behind me, and for the first time, I realized how small it looked from out here, how different it was to be on the other side of its walls. 4 years, it had been my whole world, and yet here I was, in a place where that world couldn't contain me. When I finally hurried back, shutting the gate behind me, the nervous trembling returned. But under it all was something else, something stronger: pride. I hadn't just dreamed of walking outside, I had walked. I had lived it. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered a quiet truth into the darkness, one that frightened me even as it comforted me. This isn't just a game anymore. This is who I am. It happened sooner than I expected. Until then, I had been lucky: empty streets, drawn curtains, no footsteps but my own. But the summer days stretched long, and luck has a way of thinning when tested too often. That afternoon, I chose the peach sundress again. Its softness made me feel light, unthreatened,
as though I could melt into the warmth of the day. At the vanity, I kept my makeup gentle, a sweep of mascara and a pale gloss, something that whispered rather than shouted. My reflection seemed calmer than usual, almost serene. When I stepped outside, the air was thick with the hum of cicadas. I walked confidently across the yard, through the gate, and down the street. Each step came easier now, my nerves quieted by repetition, though my heart still raced with that heady cocktail of fear and exhilaration. I reached the corner and paused, the sundress swaying slightly around my legs, the flats scuffing softly against the pavement. It was there, standing in the quiet, that I heard it, the sharp bark of a dog, the faint creak of a screen door. My whole body went rigid. Across the street, a neighbor stepped onto their porch, calling the dog back inside. They didn't glance my way at first, too busy with the leash in their hand, but my breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen, afraid to move, every inch of me screaming with the possibility of being seen. Then it happened, their head lifted, their eyes drifting casually across the street, landing in my direction. My stomach dropped, my hands went clammy. For the briefest of moments, our gazes might have touched. But then they turned away, pulling the dog inside, shutting the door without a second glance. I didn't wait. I spun on my heel, heart pounding, and hurried back down the street, through the gate, across the yard, and into the safety of the house. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter just to steady myself. And yet, once the panic ebbed, something else rose beneath it. I hadn't shattered. The world hadn't ended. Even if they had seen me, even if, for a heartbeat, I had been noticed, it hadn't destroyed me. Later, sitting in my room with the sundress still draped over me, I whispered aloud, almost daring myself, maybe being seen isn't the end. Maybe it's the beginning. The neighbor's glance haunted me for days. I replayed it endlessly. Did they really see me, or was it only my imagination? Had they recognized anything at all, or had I been just another passerby in a sundress, too unremarkable to warrant thought? The uncertainty gnawed at me, equal parts terror and strange relief. But even as fear whispered in my ear, something stronger pushed back. The image of myself standing outside, dress brushing my knees, air thick with summer, had burned itself into my memory. I couldn't undo it. I couldn't pretend I didn't want more. So when the next afternoon came, I didn't hesitate. My hand went to the white embroidered dress, the one that made me feel radiant, like I belonged under open skies. Slipping it on, I felt a calm I hadn't known before, as though the fabric itself was urging me forward. At the vanity, I painted carefully, soft eyeliner, a little shimmer at the corners of my eyes, a warm blush, and a gentle pink lipstick. My reflection looked steady, as if she had been waiting for this day. When I stepped outside, the world seemed sharper. The sky was an endless blue, the air humming with the drone of cicadas, the pavement warm under my flats. I didn't stop at the corner. I walked past it, farther than I had ever dared before, each step pulling me deeper into the world I had once only watched from the safety of my window. My heart pounded, but I held my head high, the dress swaying softly as I walked. A car passed in the distance, and though my stomach clenched, I didn't run. I kept walking, steady, ordinary, just another figure moving beneath the summer sun. It wasn't long, 5 minutes, maybe less, but it felt infinite. The sounds, the air, the rhythm of my footsteps, all of it etched into me as something I would never forget. When I returned home, I didn't rush inside. I lingered at the gate, hand resting on the wood, turning back to look at the street behind me. My chest ached with something I couldn't quite name, fear, yes, but also joy, pride, and a yearning so deep it felt like it might split me open. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table in full dress, sunlight streaming through the window, and whispered to the quiet room, I'm not just trying anymore. I'm becoming. The summer upstairs had begun as an escape, a secret curiosity folded between walls and whispers. But now, standing on the edge of the season, I could see how much it had transformed me. What started with trembling hands at a vanity had grown into footsteps along a sunlit street, into a life I could no longer tuck away. The last afternoon came quiet, the sky washed in pale blue, the air holding that heavy sweetness that hints at the season's turning. I climbed the stairs not with hesitation but with reverence, as though I were approaching an altar. At the closet, I paused, fingertips brushing the fabrics that had carried me through each step of this journey. I chose the lavender dress. It had been my first bold choice, my talisman of courage, and it felt only right to end with it. As I slipped it on, the fabric settled around me like a memory, soft and familiar, yet charged with everything I had lived through. At the vanity, I took my time, painting carefully, not to hide but to reveal. Each brushstroke, each line, each color felt like a declaration, not of disguise but of truth. When I finished, my reflection smiled back at me, not trembling, not uncertain, but whole. I descended the stairs with steady steps, the skirt of the dress whispering against my legs. The back door opened with a familiar click, and the world greeted me once more. I crossed the yard, through the gate, and onto the sidewalk, the sun warming my shoulders, the air filling my lungs with its endless hum. This time, I didn't count steps. I simply walked, letting the lavender fabric dance in the breeze, the flats tapping a rhythm that belonged only to me. A neighbor drove past, their car slowing just slightly, but I didn't falter. I kept walking, head high, heart steady. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was sneaking or pretending. I felt like I was simply there. When I finally turned back toward the house, the sight of it waiting at the end of the street was different. It was no longer just a cage of walls and windows. It was a home, yes, but not the only place I belonged. Inside, I didn't rush to undress. I lingered in the kitchen, then the living room, then upstairs at the window, gazing out at the street where I had taken my first steps into myself. The dress still wrapped me in its lavender folds, the makeup still traced my face, the smile still curved my lips. I knew then that this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The summer upstairs had given me something I had never thought I would find. A glimpse of who I truly was, shimmering and alive beneath the sunlight. And once seen, she could never be unseen. I closed my eyes, pressed my hand to the fabric at my chest, and whispered a vow I would carry forever. I will not forget her. I will not let her disappear. She is me. She always has been. And with that, the summer upstairs became more than a memory, it became a promise.